Well, welcome to the Cut for Time podcast here at the Canton United Methodist Church. My name is Pastor Clay. I'm joined by Eric Stearns, and today we're going to be digging into the message from Sunday, which was on scent. We're doing this sermon series through the five senses, and it was Smell Sunday on Sunday, and we're going to talk about just what our lives smell like and just what David was getting after when he wrote what he wrote in Psalm 141. So one of the lines that I kind of had in parentheses as I was putting my sermon notes together on Saturday was a question about what our lives smell like. The whole thing with the Psalm with 141 is that this is David praying to God for his righteousness. His standing before God would not be marred by what's going on in the rest of the world, in the rest of his world. Mm-hmm. And he's saying, God, post a guard at my lips, make sure that I don't say anything that I don't want to say about these people, guard my heart. If I'm straying from righteousness, correct me. Send someone to correct me. If let them strike me down and get me back on the right path. David is so concerned with his righteousness, with his standing before God, and what it just makes me think about and wonder about. That's for him, that's an offering to God. That is going to be a scent pleasing to God. Mm-hmm. In the same way that, what he's hoping, his prayer, he hopes is a scent pleasing to God, but he's also hoping that his life is a scent pleasing to God. Mm-hmm. And one of the ideas that I had but did not have time to dig into is just, what do our lives smell like? That we're talking about how powerful scent can be for our memories, and how powerful that scent memory of incense and offerings burning in the tabernacle were for David. But what do our lives smell like? Are our lives a scent pleasing to God? Are we as concerned with our own walk and our own righteousness as David was? There are good smells and bad smells. Mm-hmm. And Deb kind of alluded to it in her children's message a little bit, but I think that's worth exploring a little bit, of just saying, this also gives us the opportunity to consider, do we take prayer this seriously? Do we take our faith this seriously? Do we take our own righteousness this seriously? Do we want to live a life that's a scent pleasing to God, or live a life that is a scent that, or is a stench to God? Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting idea to play with and kind of wonder at a little bit, and just kind of one of those things that you can dig in and challenge yourself with. David had these specific steps to living a life and to living a life that was a scent pleasing to God. Guard my mouth. Mm-hmm. Don't let me be dragged down. Guard what I put into myself. Don't let me dine on the delicacies of those that are evil. That's, saying, again, that's another way of saying, again, protect me from those others mm-hmm. that are not living in your way. And I wonder if we open that space for us to consider, especially as we're talking about smells, are we a scent pleasing to God? Do we make God, is that a good smell or a bad smell? To quote the children's sermon. And I wanted to dig into that, and especially because of what Deb talked about in her children's sermon, but I just did not have the time to kind of get to that. And there are times where I know that my life just stinks to God. There are, I may have mentioned this to you on a different conversation, but I was at the four-way stop by Water Tower Park a couple weeks ago, mm-hmm. and someone they were on the verge of not stopping. Mm-hmm. And I was going because I had stopped first and I had the right of way. So I was going, but they're just not stopping. They're not stopping. They're not stopping. I was like, okay, slam on the brakes. And I wanted to let a certain finger fly because there were certain words flying out of my mouth at that point in time. But Lindsay is the first one to just kind of hold my hand, and not in a good way, of just saying, put it down. Because she knows. A few years ago, when we were living in Sioux Falls, so this would have been a long time ago, when we were newly-ish married, someone flipped a U on Louise, mm-hmm. Between like by Barnes and Noble. Like it's a really
Yep.
weird intersection to begin with and a really busy intersection, but just flipped a whole U-turn in front of me, cut me off in the midst of it, and like he got up into one lane at the light, and I got right next to him, and I was like, oh, I want to flip him off so bad. Like that bubbles up.
Yes.
And I know in my heart of hearts that I just know that that's not the right thing, and that's kind of the thing that we're talking about, being a stench to God. But yet here it is in my life, a lot. Like I am so challenged by David's words and David's life that I really dug into this psalm, not just this week, but just as I read through the Psalms. Yeah.
When I think about, like if someone I'm working with makes a mistake, whether it be at work or somewhere,
Right.
and I'll just get so frustrated. Like, how on earth could you make that mistake? This should be super easy. I don't understand why you did this. And I get all upset about it. But then I'm thinking to myself, but I've made mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and someone had the grace to not,
Right.
badger me about it. Like,
Right.
why am I getting so upset about this?
Yep.
That's definitely a stench.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I'm quick to judge someone else when they do something wrong, and then the next breath, hope for grace the next time I do something wrong.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yep. But then David's other things were like, guard my heart, basically. And that's been kind of when I was growing up, that was definitely a phrase that we heard a lot in our youth ministry. The idea of living godly lives and guarding what comes into the very core of our being. And that should be, the gospel of Jesus Christ. But sometimes it's, ...
Right.
And when you're in high school, sometimes it's a girlfriend, or sometimes it's a group of friends that are really cool but don't go to church and do, things that aren't, church appropriate activities for teenagers. And, just the idea of taking it that seriously. The fact that this should change our lives and shift our priorities to the point where we don't let certain things in. And just, I've said this before from the pulpit, just on the basis of my faith, I can't do X, Y, Z. In my own life, I don't always see that as the biggest thing. Like there are things that I let in that are not, the right things, but yet there they are. And David was so cautious and so careful and cared that much about how his life smelled. And then just to ask for the counsel of someone wiser than him, to if he is getting off track, to bring him back.
Yep.
And the thing that I love about that is how it sets up what happens in the kind of the second half of David's life, where he has this thing with Uriah, where he sees Uriah's wife Bathsheba and is inclined to her, to put it mildly, and puts Uriah on the front lines of the battle and makes sure that Uriah dies so that he can hang out with Bathsheba. And a prophet named Nathan comes to him and tells him a parable, basically, tells him a story about, this leader that did this unjust thing. And it's what David had hoped for. It's what David had prayed for coming true in this moment where he was going off track in very real ways, and here comes the wise counsel of someone that's concerned for his righteousness.
Right.
It's what he prayed for coming to fruition in a weird way, but yet in a faithful way. And again, that's something I was like toying with putting into the sermon. I was just like, I don't know if I want to go down that rabbit hole, because that gets into a whole different thing.
But it's so true, because at least for me, you think about the things that we're not supposed to do or not supposed to let into our lives. And I feel like we make better decisions after we see it with more clarity after we've let them in.
Yes.
After we've already made the wrong decision.
Yep, absolutely.
We're like, man, we shouldn't have done that. And you feel terrible about it, whatever that might be. And then hopefully you make the right decision the next time. But you definitely see that more clearly.
Yep.
Because in the moment you're like, oh, it can't be that bad,
Right.
Whatever.
Yep.
And then afterwards, like, no, that was a really dumb decision.
That was real bad. Yeah,
Mhm.
that was real bad.
And David did the same thing.
David very much did the same thing. And
Mhm.
like, even with this problematic stuff in his life, and like there's no denying how problematic it was that he, went out of his way to have this affair, he still called a man after God's own heart. That woke him up basically.
Mm-hmm.
To it's kind of a weird jump in the Psalms, but from 141 to Psalm 51, like that's Psalm 51 is the psalm that's written after all this goes down,
Mm-hmm.
and David says, "Create in me a clean heart, O God." Like, I'm bringing it back. I'm going to repent. I'm going to look back to how I live rightly for you.
Mm-hmm.
Create in me a clean heart, O God. Cleanse me with hyssop, and it goes on from there. But like, that's what David hoped would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that we have that same hope for ourselves as well. Like, I have mentioned before some connections to some other clergy friends, but like, there are people that speak into my life that I let into, in a good way, let into my heart.
Mm-hmm.
To say, okay, where am I living godly, and where am I getting off track, and how do we get back on, how do I make those, make better choices, basically. Right. And so it's just kind of a cool a thing that I've been able to be a part of, and hopefully, can be a part of for someone else as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, but just think about that for a second too. Like David, for I touched on this that a month ago, 2 months ago, and I preached last.
Yeah.
Think of what David did, and for God to still forgive him.
Yeah.
Like if there's more hope in that. I think about that a lot.
Yep.
Like honestly, when I screw up, I'm like, well, if David can do that,
Right. Yep.
there's still space for me in heaven.
Yes. Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Think about that every time.
So we tried to do a scent thing today that I don't know if it was as successful as I wanted it to be or not.
Because my mother's bread maker was burning.
No, it was Alicia's.
Oh,
it wasn't your mother's. Your mother's did fantastic.
Oh, that one was there.
But I just don't know. When I did my practice loaf at home, the house smelled like bread for a while afterwards. So I was like, perfect, we got this. I've got 2 lined up. Maybe should have gone for 3. I don't know what the answer was, but yeah, definitely it's a good idea that didn't work as well as I wanted it to, but yet we can kind of have a nice chuckle because I didn't burn the church down.
Yep.
So
I walked in, I'm like, uh-oh. What happened?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. So it happened. Like we discovered it like right before church because Abby had come up to do her sound check for special music, and she's like, "This is smoking, and it smells like it's burning." I was just like, "Oh no, what's gonna happen?" I'm sure it'll be fine.
I'm sure it'll be. It was fine.
It was fine. Just it was a different scent than we were anticipating, which can be powerful.
It
and fun,
filled the room, that's for sure.
That's true. It did. That did its part of the job. So.
Oh, funny.
Oh man.
I liked the idea.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Yeah.
There was definitely a scent in here. So.
There was.
And I liked your line about spending time with middle schoolers.
Yes.
For 2 weeks.
Yep.
And knowing what scent is.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And like, even though I wasn't staying with campers, I was still in a lot of rooms with middle schoolers, especially like after they've been outside and running and hot and sweaty and gross, and then like into a dining hall where we have to wash our hands, and that boy's bathroom, y'all. That's a smell. That's a scent right there.
Oh, I can remember
So.
camp. Those cabins smelled so bad.
Oh yes.
Because you stuck to those mattresses and you were just
Yup.
sweating all night. And those things were awful.
Yep.
But it was camp.
Exactly.
You want to talk about
Yes.
scents.
Right? Oh yeah.
Like when I walked into the lifeguard cabin.
Yep.
That's there.
Yep.
And it still smells like camp.
Oh yeah.
It still smells, and like it just takes you back to that time of having a ball when you were a kid and just
Yes.
running around that place.
Definitely there. I mean, like Deb said in the children's sermon, like the smell of campfire, like that is definitely a smell where like I can feel the presence of God in that, man. Like that has so many memories for me. Yeah, that's foundational. That's a foundational smell for me.
It is amazing how scents can just take you anywhere.
So what are those smells for you, Eric?
Well, there's the lifeguard cabin
Yep.
at Ponset. Still smells the same as 25 years ago when I was there. Diesel exhaust,
Okay.
even though I still farm,
Yep.
but it still takes me back to when I was a little kid running around with Dad.
Mm-hmm.
If we were doing this on taste, I could.
Right.
There's all sorts of tastes that take me back to my grandma. But,
Yep. Yep.
um,
I'm sure some of those, I mean, smell and taste are
Yes,
pretty related.
pretty close.
So, yeah.
it's funny. The high school gym, both high school gyms here,
Mm-hmm.
smell the same as they always have. And for some reason, when I walk in there, it'll take me back to playing high school basketball,
Sure.
which I loved every second of.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, for some reason. But it's just, I don't know. I always link the scent to a good memory, so that's good. But how about for you?
Yeah, so definitely, like I mentioned on in the sermon, the smell of baked bread, like that was Grandma Doris's. Like she baked all kinds of other stuff too, but like it was her fudge and her bread that were like the prime Doris Lundberg recipes. Like we have both of those recipes. We can't replicate them.
Isn't that amazing?
Oh man,
I swear they left a recipe.
I really
ingredient off
think
the
I
recipe
really
card.
think they had to have.
Mm-hmm.
But I just remember walking into her house and just being hit with this overwhelming wave of fresh bread and just knowing it was going to be a great time at Grandma Doris's house.
Yep.
No, but really the incense at Vera McKinnon Chapel, like I worked there for 2.5 years in seminary before I was appointed somewhere, and it just was a very powerful time I was a 0.8 employee. So I worked 32.5 hours a week. And like I was given a break during that, and I would eat something real quick and then just go and, be in prayer about stuff, just be in prayer for, my coworkers or just, school because I was crazy and, whatever else. But it was definitely a discipline and a rhythm that I got into that was very beneficial in my faith development and in my development as a pastor. So that's definitely a smell that brings me back. This isn't really a good memory, but like I remember the first time I went to a Catholic funeral. It was for a dear friend of mine named Nancy Eckroth. I remember like we were it was such a big funeral. It had to be in the high school gym in Gregory because Nancy was everyone's best friend. But the priest did have a censer and did do incense in the gym, and that is a smell that has stuck with me through the years. There's a lot of very the first time I was a part of a smudging ceremony where you burn sage. It's a Native American spiritual practice that was being used in a Christian sense, which I have feelings about now, but the smell of the burning sage was, it was to cleanse the space, basically, is what smudging does. It was sage and sweetgrass were the things that were burnt. And those are scents that are definitely very powerful and very prominent in, my scent memory.
So we've covered taste, hearing, and smell.
Yep.
What's next?
Yes. So next week is going to be look and see. We're talking about the things that we see, and we're actually going to be doing the experiential piece of that is going to be watching a video from a ministry called Splat Painting Experience. Splat came to the Dakotas in 2015 to a gathering called DAC Youth, which was held up in Aberdeen, and did a big, cool painting. Then they sold it for like $1,000. Like it was a big canvas. What he does, he's just kind of one guy. Is he splatter paints basically a picture, and then it's usually upside down, and so like he'll do this big whole thing and this big dramatic painting while something is being read and a piece of music is being played, and then you're just like, what is this thing going to be? And you're like wondering the entire time, and then they rotate the picture and you're like, oh, that's what it is. Wow, cool. So it's really cool live, but they did sell a DVD of it, and I definitely bought the DVD. So we'll be watching a DVD clip as a part of the sermon on Sunday.
Cool.
To think about how do the things that we see and perceive connect us to God. I mean, I just think you look outside and how you could not be convinced that the Creator did all this is, I don't get it. I get that's my bias as a person of faith, but I just see so much order where order should not exist. That who did that?
Right.
God. That's the answer. Like, however you come down and how that all happened, fine, whatever. But like, let's just acknowledge that God did this.
Yeah.
You know, and so we were talking about how we look and see, and then watching the Splat video, which I'm really excited about.
I'm looking forward to it because that's where I feel God's presence all the time. Like you
Nice.
said, when we're living in South Dakota and you can't see it, like you can't see anything at that point.
Right.
Because there are sunsets, there are sunrises, there's all sorts of stuff.
Absolutely.
When you're about to shoot that deer
Yes.
100 yards away, like all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
There's something about it. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Thanks for joining us on this week's podcast. Join us again next week in person or online, and have a good week.
Thanks for listening to our Cut for Time conversation. Join us for worship in person or on Facebook Live Sundays at 10 o'clock Central Time. And now go in peace and serve the Lord.